This is Mrs. Moore, and we're going to talk about figurative language. Again, you can use the guided notes or any note-taking approach that you prefer. So, analyzing figurative language means asking why a poet chooses the words that he or she or they choose. And that's what we're going to look at, some examples of specific word choices that carry additional meaning. So, because poetry is condensed language, poets will choose words that can carry a lot of meaning. And one way that they do that is choosing words that stand for more than one concept. One example is the word still right here. Still can mean not moving. It can also mean quiet, like it was a still night. It can mean continuing. I'm still going. And all of these meanings can be packed into the word. So when a poet uses it, they may be referencing more than one meaning. So one way that we want to talk about words that have multiple meanings is to talk about kind of stand-ins in poetry. And we will get into this even more in metaphor and simile, but it's important for now to understand that this can be used a lot of ways. So for example, we do this every day with pronouns already. A pronoun is a stand-in for a noun because when we use a pronoun, we are referencing something or someone else. We don't say Jim goes to the store to buy Jim's cookies. We say Jim goes to the store to buy his cookies because he, the pronoun, is standing in for Jim. The technical term for this is a referent, and the word that's being referred to is an antecedent. Antecedent means comes before. Ante before, sedent comes. Because it comes before the referent. So pronouns are an obvious example, but we do this in other ways too. For example, we have a cat whose name is Buddy, and we call him by all kinds of other names. Those are all reference to the antecedent that is his actual name, Buddy. Sometimes in poetry, that antecedent can be very obvious. It's actually referenced in the text, and then the referent itself is kind of referring back to that. But sometimes you have to do a little bit of inference work. For example, in this tiny poem, Uses of Sorrow, someone is a pronoun. We don't know who the someone is. We know it's someone they loved, but not who that someone is. A box full of darkness. We don't know what this was. I doubt it was a literal box full of darkness. Those are rather hard to get. But, what was this box full of darkness? Something sorrowful, something painful, something frustrating. We don't know. And this gift also references back to that box full of darkness, which again is a mystery. The idea of its being a mystery is fine because that lets us as readers kind of bring in what might be a box full of darkness for our own selves. So we're going to look at Aunt Jennifer really very quickly here and talk about referents and antecedents. And I want to kind of point out just one little corner of this poem. And that is right down here. This part, the massive weight of Uncle's wedding band sits heavily upon Aunt Jennifer's hand. And then down here, when Aunt is dead, her terrified hands will lie still ringed with ordeals she was mastered by. Ordeals, we don't know what these ordeals are, but we can figure it out from context here. It says that she's still ringed with ordeals, and we know that her hands have a ring on them, right? Uncle's wedding band. Uncle's wedding band is a ring that's on her finger. And so by saying that she's ringed with ordeals, we're saying that, perhaps these ordeals were something imposed upon her by Uncle. And in fact, the fact that she was mastered by these ordeals, if Uncle was these ordeals, that this indicates to us that maybe this was not a very happy marriage, and in fact, possibly an abusive one. The fact that band sits heavily upon her hand and that it is still ringed with ordeals, that is an example of a referent ringed with ordeals, these ordeals that we can puzzle out from clues in the text. So we're going to shift a little bit to talk about some other tools that can help repetition and alliteration. Poems also play with sound. They play with ideas, but they also play with sounds. So this poem by Gwendolyn Brooks uses both repeating words in that we have the wheeze at the end of the line each time. And we also uses similar sounds to connect concepts and make them miserable. Strike straight, sing sin, jazz June, lurk late. We as human beings, we really love alliteration almost as much as we love rhyming. And in fact, alliteration is one of the oldest tricks that we have in the poetry book. Alliteration was a key factor of Anglo-Saxon poetry, along with that caesura that we looked up earlier. So with repetition, with repeating words and phrases in the text, that is something that poets use to draw attention to concepts and to intensify them. Sometimes they do it to create a pattern, and sometimes they'll break that pattern for effect. In this case, we have the pattern of repetition being created for effect. So this is an Emily Dickinson poem. And the first stanza, she says, wild nights, were I with thee. Wild nights should be our luxury. And this is repetition to intensify emotion. Whereas down here in the second stanza, done with the compass, done with the chart, demonstrates her determination. So this repetition is there to demonstrate her determination on the concept. And so this repetition can be used in these ways, and also to, bring back something as a mnemonic so that you'll remember it better. Alliteration is a sound trick. It's repeating sounds at the beginning of words. And sometimes this is done to create sort of a soundscape, a sonic background. And sometimes it's done to connect concepts. Sometimes it's done to do both. In this particular tiny snippet from Macbeth, this is, I think, the very first lines: double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. The repeated D and B and T sounds make it sound as though something is bubbling in the cauldron. If you say it aloud, you can almost hear it. But it also, these connect concepts, right? Double, double. The toil and trouble are linked. This is work and things that go bad. Fire burn and cauldron bubble. The cauldron is bubbling and the fire is burning, and this together, something bad's going to happen. And in fact, that's about what the three witches are about to tell to Macbeth. So I did want to look very quickly at Lin-Manuel Miranda for a second, because I like Hamilton, but also because Hamilton uses a lot of these tools, right? I was going to look at just two segments here. One is repetition with this particular word, and then an almost repetition. Lin-Manuel Miranda describes Hamilton as the $10 founding father without a father. He was an orphan, but the idea that he's also a father of our country, that kind of ties in. So we have a contrast as well as that repetition. And then he tucks in this, got a lot farther by working a lot harder. So he got farther so that he could be a founding father. Even though he didn't have a father, he became one. And those three farther sounds kind of emphasize that. For other alliteration, down here, we have this particular line: the brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter, which I find fascinating because he's a brother as well as a father, so that does tie back. And he was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter. Steal is the only one that doesn't alliterate, and it's also the only one that's illegal, which is a neat trick. So, to return briefly to Aunt Jennifer and look at where we find alliteration and repetition, I wanted to start this one with looking a little bit at repetition. In this case, we have the repetition of Aunt Jennifer at the beginning of both of these stanzas. First, we have Aunt Jennifer's tigers, and then we have her fingers. So we get first Aunt Jennifer's imagination and then Aunt Jennifer's reality. The other thing that we get in terms of repetition is the tigers themselves. These tigers show up here at the beginning and they return down here at the end. And in fact, it's the first thing we know is that they prance across a screen and they will go on prancing down here at the end. So we kind of begin and end with the tigers. That repetition helps bring it full circle. It's also important to look at alliteration, and this is a little more subtle than the alliteration you'll find in for example, Manuel Miranda, but you have, for example, her fingers fluttering through her wool. We have the massive weight of the wedding band that sits heavily upon her hand. And meanwhile, the tigers in the panel will go on prancing, proud and unafraid. So we have tied together the weight of the wedding that kind of reinforces what we were saying before about this marriage not necessarily being good, which sits heavily upon her hand. Again, that reinforces it too. So, and the fingers fluttering, we get this sense that she's a sort of, she's trying to complete this project, and her hands are fluttering. It's the weight of the, towards something imaginative. It's the weight of the wedding band that's pulling her down. So again, we have alliteration and repetition kind of helping to support the ideas that we found in our look at reference and antecedents. So why did poets choose those words? This is always something that we should consider, because we want to know what's actually being referenced. We want to get more meaning by studying those reference and antecedents more carefully. And then we want to see how concepts are being connected and emphasized through the use of repetition and alliteration. These tools make us stronger literary analysts.